Eric, Chelsea, and Chris. Airplanes crashing into buildings. People jumping out of windows of 100-story buildings falling to their death on the streets below. Steel buildings collapsing. Nearly 3,000 people losing their life in one single day. A country under attack. Sounds like a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? No, this was reality on September 11, 2001. Hi, I'm Tia Hermanson, and today I'm going to tell you about the events what we now simply refer to as 9/11. I'm going to tell you about that fateful day, the events leading up to that day, and about the aftermath of that specific day. I was a married mother of 3 during this time. I, along with most of the country, watched in horror as these events unfolded. I followed the news for nearly 24 straight hours of most of my awake hours in the weeks following. This event, in the minds of many people, changed the course of the American government that we know today. 9/11 was a terrorist attack on the United States on the country's own soil. It started as a clear Tuesday morning. 4 flights took off from various locations across the east, not knowing it would be a fateful flight. The 4 planes were hijacked by members of a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. According to Margaret Webb Pressler, a journalist for the Washington Post, Al-Qaeda is a violent group of people to practice Muslim religion and want to create a Muslim state across the world. They do not agree with freedom and do not want the U.S. to spread their freedom across the globe. 2 of the hijacked planes purposely slammed into identical skyscrapers known as the Twin Towers in New York. Thousands of people were killed. Many of them jumped from buildings as they were trapped above a fiery inferno above that the blast created, and ultimately jumped to their death on the streets below. The Twin Towers ultimately collapsed, killing thousands who were still inside and trapped. A 3rd hijacked plane was purposely crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. 189 people were killed in that crash. A 4th plane, which according to Pressler was headed to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., crashed in rural Pennsylvania after a group of passengers fought with the hijacker. Al-Qaeda immediately took responsibility for the attack. Osama bin Laden was the leader of Al-Qaeda, and according to Joe Carter, a journalist for Action Institute Power Blog, bin Laden had funded several terror attacks across the globe in the previous decades. The response from United States President George W. Bush was immediate and assuring that the U.S. would hunt down and punish those responsible for the acts of terror against the United States. Several members of Al-Qaeda were captured in the coming months. They were all from places from all around the world, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. Bin Laden was ultimately captured and killed years later. This was the largest terror attack on Americans in U.S. history. Some negative press surround the U.S. government immediately following and continues to raise questions today. According to Kurt Eichenwald, who writes for the New York Times, the United States may have had warning that an attack of this magnitude was imminent, did not do enough to prevent this tragedy from happening. There were several agents documented by Eichenwald that showed that the government had warning that an attack of some sort was coming. On August 6 of 2001, President Bush received a presidential daily briefing from American intelligence agencies that Al-Qaeda was determined to strike the U.S. on U.S. soil and that people were already trained and in place to do just that. The White House ultimately dismissed the information, according to Eichenwald, stating that it was simply an assessment of Al-Qaeda's history rather than a warning that an attack was imminent. Even earlier than the August briefing, May 1st shows that President Bush had an earlier warning about bin Laden's goal to strike the U.S. Even Bush had an earlier warning about bin Laden's goal to strike the U.S. Many people believe the government dismissed these warnings and did not do enough to try to stop the attack. The month following the May 1st briefing led to more briefings to the president that an attack was underway, yet nothing has been made public stating that the threat was taken serious. They tried to say that they had not been told when and where the attack would happen. Could the event have prevented if the warnings were not dismissed as false information? We'll never know. Personally, the day itself is one that is burned into my memory forever. The day of the attack, the news kept showing the smoke cloud in the sky from the burning rubble. The sound of bodies hitting the concrete right behind the news reporters is a sound that I will never, ever forget hearing. The everyday life for all Americans changed almost as soon as the airplanes hit the buildings. The immediate response from the public was very patriotic. but there was also widespread panic amongst most Americans and people across the globe. I remember hearing of thousands of people going to donate blood on or shortly after the day of 9/11. I remember hearing of thousands of people volunteering to go help at the site that became known as Ground Zero. I remember the quiet in the sky as all planes were grounded for days. The only planes in the sky above the United States were that of U.S. military. The stock markets in New York also shut down for days following the attacks. There are many new laws in place as a result of 9/11. According to Ballard Spa law firm, the U.S. Patriot Act was written into law just over a month after the attacks. This amended numerous existing laws, including the Federal Anti-Money Laundering Statute and Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, to make them tougher of terrorism. Also, according to Ballard Spa, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was amended in 2001 and in 2008 in response to 9/11. Ballard Spa further explains that the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002 in response to the attacks. This is the main agency that resulted from the attacks. They deal in regulations of everything from border security to national disaster management. The Homeland Security does everything it does to combat terrorism and other domestic threats. This was a day that definitely changed the American ways in many ways. The attack itself, the events leading up to the attack, and the aftermath are still a hotly debated topic in areas ranging from government politics to coffee shop talk. For those of you that were live, I want to ask you one simple question, and I will quote the song by Alan Jackson, "Where were you when the world stopped turning on that cold September day?"